everyone. An excellent evening and morning to each one of you. I'm Muthu and I'm heading the Data and AI studio at Drillio. And today I'm excited to share my experience in generative AI based on the 50 plus conversations and the projects that I've been leading with our customers at Drillio. Following my presentation, I'll invite two of my favorite leaders, Chandar, our CTO, and Sridhar, our Data and AI practice lead, for a fireside chat on the why, how, and what of generative AI. Due to the number of participants, we will have all the attendees on mute, but we would like to make this more interactive. So feel free to share your comments, questions in the chat window. We will try and answer during the session or respond after the session as part of the FAQ document. Well, ever since ChatGPT arrived, we have been seeing an alarming rise on content with Gen AI, and it has unlocked technology's disruptive potential in amplifying the decisioning for humans and businesses. But we all know it and are experiencing some of it too. But most companies, including some of our customers, are grappling with multiple unanswered questions around what use cases are specific to my business need. Where am I going to maximize the value that I can get out of generative AI? What about the AI governance and the regulatory compliance? What happens when I integrate it with OpenAI? Is my data moving out of my environment? What does it take for me to scale from, say, a POC to production? So here we are to demystify and help you accelerate with generative AI in the first of the Office Hours series. Well, the field of generative AI has snowballed, leading to an overwhelming amount of content available. So I'm sure a lot of you are already wondering, is this going to be, another one of those series where we are going to again talk about the same thing that is happening, in the internet, right? No. The abundance of information can, make knowing where to start and what resources to trust also very challenging, and also staying up to date with all the latest research and advancements that are happening. There are a lot of new libraries that are coming out in the market, and this also intersects with several disciplines, right? Now you have science that is coming out from the foundation models. Then we have engineering and infrastructure, which is required for scaling. We need to understand the math behind some of these models so that we are able to make the right decisions on prompt engineering and fine tuning. So this whole multidisciplinary nature will also lead to a wide range of content with varying technical depth and complexity, making it very challenging for us to filter through the material. Now, there are also multiple resources that will cover the same concepts very differently. Right now, when we were, within Drillio trying to look at what kind of L&D programs to look at, we found the same concepts, similar programs, but not exactly, looking at how and what of generative AI. So this whole redundancy can also make identifying the most relevant resources for our needs challenging. So this series is intended to bring you the realities of generative AI, have an open dialogue on the issues that we are still trying to, resolve in the industry as well. For example, hallucinations, we have a lot of methods that we are trying out in production, but there are things that we are able to solve. There are, some open challenges that even, Microsoft and other customers are also trying to solve along with us and the industry. So that is all we are, going to talk about, the realities of generative AI, and talk what is the hype? Is this real? What are the issues? What solutions have worked? What use cases are real? Now, moving on to the potential of generative AI. McKinsey's latest research estimates that Gen AI could add up to 2.6 trillion to 4.4 trillion annually across the 63 use cases they have analyzed. By comparison, the UK's entire GDP in 2021 was only 3.1 trillion. So Gen AI would increase the impact of all AI by 15 to 40%. This is just, some stats that we found from McKinsey and folks that confirms, our beliefs too, that this is not a hype and it is real. Now, moving quickly to the gold rush on the Gen AI acquisitions, right? The booming demand for Gen AI is beginning to drive startup acquisitions. And according to the analysts, the upswing could also rekindle the mergers and acquisition business across the startup universe. And one of the interesting and the recent ones include Mosaic ML acquisition by Databricks for $1.3 billion. And Mosaic ML is an open source startup with neural network expertise that has built a platform for organizations to train the LLMs and deploy generative AI tools based on the LLMs. Well, while these are great, we will also talk a little bit about the challenges. Now, despite the anticipation, or perhaps because of it, leaders struggle with approaching generative AI. In the race to capitalize on the potential of Gen AI, we devote substantial resources to evaluating which foundational model to use and spend lesser time and effort on how generative AI can help solve the current business problem and meet our current business objectives. So as we move from hype to reality, there are a few blockers and also apprehensions while deciding where to invest in generative AI. And what we found was the price and the cost pressure is one of the most primary factors. Now, the answer has bottom line ramification. The high cost of machine learning is the uncomfortable reality in the industry. While ChatGPT in itself is free, the GPT model's prices can run high for complex applications or large data volumes. So demonstrating the feasibility of a simple proof of concept using GPT models, say, for example, we are trying to build a question and answering use case within a customer service domain, or to quickly and accurately answer customer queries without the need to search through a database manually, could easily mount between $2K to $13K dollars based on the complexity and the data volumes that we are going to be dealing with. There is also an apprehension about the changing consumer needs, that its correlation to the cost that we put in to build and fine-tune a model. And then after the POC, we realize that, okay, this is not what the consumers are looking for. So, when we go and change, this is also a cost which becomes a technical debt. Now, with the recent economic slowdowns that are also parallelly happening in 2023, there's also a push in the market to maximize your existing investments rather than to invest in a new transformation, which is like a AI-based transformation. And the other problem, which is largely, happening, is because of the PII information. Now, generative AI models require access to large data sets for training, and this might include sensitive or PII information. Now, business leaders will have to ensure that appropriate data privacy measures are in place to protect individuals' customers' privacy rights. Now, this involves obtaining informed consent from the customers, anonymizing or de-identifying the data, implementing secure storage and transmission protocols, and adhering to the data protection regulations such as the GDPR or CCPA constraints. The last one, which is, of course, the constraint that is spoken very widely, is on the IP and the bias issues. Now, generative models can generate content that resembles existing copyrighted material. It can also inadvertently perpetuate biases in the training data, leading to how it can just perpetuate into inferencing, and it can get into all the rest of the LLM lifecycle. But while all these challenges have been growing in the last 2 quarters, we also see that the solutions for some of these issues are maturing faster than the problems. So we will talk about some of these solutions today, and more we will cover in the subsequent sessions when we get into very specific, GDPR, CCPA complaints. So these are some of the things that we will be covering in our healthcare, BFSI, domain-specific sessions. Now, moving on to the potential use cases of generative AI. Traditional advanced analytics is highly effective in performing numerical and optimization tasks. However, as generative AI continues to mature, it has the potential to open whole new frontiers across the value chain. And we are already seeing this in the market, right? It has already expanded the possibilities of what AI overall can achieve. And across the industries, we have seen, while there are like 63 use cases by McKinsey, there are 100+ use cases that are already floating in the market. We have personally seen success with a few use cases, and I wanted to talk about 3 of them, where the volume of requests from our customers is also high, and where I have also personally seen a lot of success in these 3 use cases. The first one is the customer operations to improve a customer and agent experiences. Now, contact center automation and virtual agents where we could enable the agents with the context of the customer, real-time information retrieval from larger databases with unstructured data, summarization of issues and context with respect to a customer, coupled with handling the agent routing, which agent has historically done well in the past, and doing some of these things real time with generative AI is also a very successful use case that we were able to implement. By improving the quality and effectiveness of interactions via automated channels, Gen AI could automate responses to a higher percentage of customer queries, enabling the teams to take on queries that can only be resolved by a human agent in the past. Now, in the last few quarters, we have seen an efficiency improvement of up to 40% with just automation of the 2 or 3 NLP tasks that I just spoke about in this area. The second important use case, which we are also trying to get into every project of Brilio, is on the engineering area, right? So engineering is another area where we have seen success and the uptake of customers looking to improve the efficiency of developers, especially when we do, like, say, a platform modernization project or a data modernization project. There are tasks like, how do we generate initial code drafts? How can I do code correction? Or how can I do code refactoring? Can I do root cause analysis? Can we generate test cases and automate end-to-end testing? Can we synthetically create data or generate data for testing? This includes any forms of data, right? Like, for example, text, it can be images. So these are also, things that we are able to, get very good efficiency. While I wouldn't say that for all languages of codes, we are able to create really, good quality standard codes, but still we have had very good success, especially from querying languages like SQL. Now, the third one, which is where, we started our first generative AI project, was on AI-enabled BI. Now, instead of creating hundreds of dashboards, which, becomes a technical depth after a certain point, we have integrated Gen AI on data models directly to answer queries and generate insights on the underlying data that can significantly reduce time to market and also reduce the debt in maintaining these dashboards. Now, this has worked in some scenarios, and this has also not worked in certain scenarios. When I say it has not worked, I'm talking about scenarios where there are personas who will look for same KPIs, same information day in and day out. For these consumers, dashboards is definitely the right way to consume. But there are very specific scenarios, especially in supply chain, where we have seen that the need, the kind of questions, the kind of root cause analysis that is required, the kind of personas who are more comfortable using a chatbot rather than to use dashboard. In these scenarios, we found the AI-enabled BI to be far more, easy to experience, and also it is a cheaper alternative for us. Instead of having a team to keep, recreating the dashboards or keep changing the KPIs, this is a faster way for us to, time to market is also good. And also from a user experience perspective, it's a much faster solution. Now, moving on to the generative AI strategy. The Gen AI strategy is impeccable for every business today. And this strategy, when I say strategy, we are not talking about integrating, GPT models with your ecosystem or fine-tuning the models that are existent, right? It's about creating a robust Gen AI strategy that creates a concrete connection between technology and its business value creation. Now, what we mean by that, right? The two most important parts in the strategy will be, what am I going to solve, right? So that is the first step. What problem do we want to solve? And how are we going to arrive at that problem that we are going to solve, and the outcomes? Because if we don't define the outcomes, then it's going to become very difficult for us to measure whether, this is really adding value, or are we just, doing this for the hype of generative AI, right? Now, if we look at the first part on the problem solving approach, right, it's important for us to know what is the quality of data I have, because while the foundational models are going to help us in getting that, first stage right, it is also very important for us to understand how are we going to fine tune this information and what data do I have is this the right quality of data? Is the data going to be available? And how am I maintaining this data? And what kind of PII information we have? Does it already have any kind of bias that I need to correct? What kind of compliance, what kind of masking I need to do before it gets integrated with any large language model? So there are a lot of aspects that we will look at from a data perspective. Then we will look at the choice of models, what kind of insights we want to generate. Say if it's a structured data, and if there are very specific kind of insights that we want to generate, then we might want to question, do we need generative AI? Can we just not solve this using a classic ML use case, right? So then we look at consumption, adoption. And again, from a consumption and adoption perspective, it's also about, hey, is this going to be, delivered in a very different format? Do I need to generate content? Or do I need to just retrieve the information from the existing documents, right? Because all these small nuances will help us to, make decisions on the choice of models and the choice of solutions that we are going to be looking at. And of course, human in the element is extremely important, right? Because of course, all of you would have read about hallucinations and how generative AI can start creating content when it does not have access to the particular information it is looking for. So human in the loop is very important, but if we are going to keep too much of human in the loop, it's also not serving the purpose. So identifying how am I going to monitor, where am I going to bring in the human in the loop? So this part of the problem solving approach is very important. Now coming back to the outcomes. Now from the outcome perspective, efficiency, productive gains are not the only ones that are important. PRISM is becoming the most important outcome that a lot of our BFSI and healthcare customers are putting upfront in front of efficiency and experience, right? Now then comes the whole adoption perspective, resilience, like how resilient this whole system is going to withstand some of these, chaos that the generative content can bring in. So this is from the outcomes perspective. Now, from the problem solving to the outcomes, what are the different, steps that we go through? We typically have something called Generative AI Readiness Index, which we are going to make it available for the customers who have joined this call today. From that readiness index, we will understand what are the gaps, what are the current state, and then we get into a detailed discovery phase. Followed by the discovery phase, we'll have an MVP that is defined for a specific customer. Then from that use case, MVP is just to, get the right kind of, AI product delivered. And then comes the scale phase where we take it to multiple customers. Now we start this journey with our stage 0, which is the Generative AI Readiness Index that I spoke about. Now this is, just 6 dimensions are there, and we are just going to go through all the different aspects within these, not 6, 5 dimensions. And we will be giving a score for every dimension based on the different aspects. Within dimensions, we also have a lot of questions that we will want to understand, and then we will give it a score. Now, this with the learnings from where we stand on the readiness, we do a detailed discovery. Now, this discovery can, go on between 4 to 6 weeks based on complexity of use case and volume of data. Now, within the discovery phase, it will start with creating an awareness. What are the potential Gen AI solutions that we can do at an enterprise level, right? And some of the prominent aspects of the problem solving will get unveiled in this phase. Now, why can't the discussed problem or the use case that we have chosen solve through a deterministic rule-based automation? And then we get into, okay, if it cannot be solved using deterministic rule-based automation, then should we use a conventional AI/ML method? Now, no, if I cannot use the AI/ML method, then comes the Gen AI. And then it gets into what are the business, implications. Are we architecturally ready to do this kind of a use case? And how do we prioritize the use case based on the execution complexity, data availability, and the quality of the data, the cost implications of people and infrastructure? Like there are some examples where we wanted to do agent, automation by reducing the 5,000 agents that were already there in our customer base. But when we did the math, because the data was not available, because the agent scripts were not available, because we could not segment the transcripts that were available, we felt that the cost of implementing a solution was way more than the impact that it was going to generate from an efficiency perspective and also from a cost perspective. So this is an example where we recommended to this particular customer that we think you shouldn't be doing this use case, right? Maybe we should look at a different use case. So there could be, scenarios where we come up with a reasoning that we can do this, or it is not going to make a lot of difference, or maybe, right now the, solutions available in the market will need too much fine tuning, which is not, probably the right time for us to do this use case. So all these things happen in the discovery phase. And we typically end this phase with scoping the MVP. Now, moving on to the MVP phase. MVP phase is primarily about delivering the business value through the development and validation of minimum set of GenAI solution features. Now, this will not be about, solving or boiling the ocean. We will pick very simple features where it is enough for us to create some learnings and get some user feedback, look at what are the costs that we have planned. Did we actually, be within that on the actual side? What kind of value quantification that we were able to measure? And based on all this, we put together a roadmap for the scale phase. Now, GenAI strategy for transitioning from MVP to scale phase, this will require a balanced, multifaceted approach, because you will have to look at, the large volumes of data that we are going to handle in an optimized manner. I'm just underlining the optimized manner because it's all about how you're going to load the data and how you're going to load the model in the most efficient way. But this is very important from a fine-tuning perspective and also at the inferencing layer. Now, once we deal with the data and the infrastructure, then comes our foundational models. So here again, we have to look at what am I going to build? How much am I going to fine tune? Do I even need fine tuning, or can I handle this using, just prompt engineering? And then, comes the explainability part. And the last part, which is very important in the scale phase, is the governance and the stability. Now, governance will be looking at ethical regulations, audit perspective, and the stability will look at the different aspects of model monitoring, hallucinations. Like I mentioned, hallucination, we are still exploring on how to evaluate and quantify a hallucination. And we are also trying different methods on how to mitigate it. Now, we cannot mitigate it completely, but what happens in the stability phase is for us to create a dashboard where we are at least notifying the business stakeholders that, hey, these are the conversations that are happening, or these are the reports that are generated, but there is a chance that these sentences could be hallucinated, right? We are just coming up with some of these which will just prompt human that this is what is happening. Now, how we're going to fix it, how this will happen in the long run, how we will handle this in scale, all this will come under the stability layer. Now, a seamless integration of all of the above components gets enabled through an automated ops process in the backend. And this is what we are calling as the LLM ops. So with this, we'll conclude this section of the talk today. We have just covered the potential of GenAI, and we all know that it's not a hype anymore, it's a reality. What use cases have worked for us? We discussed 3 use cases in brief, and how we could build the GenAI strategy from stage 0 to MVP to Q. I will now invite Chandar and Sridhar to join me for a discussion and share their market observation, insights from our customer engagements, and more. Welcome to Office Hours, Chandar and Sridhar.
Thank you, Muthu.
Thank you. Good morning. Good evening to everyone.
Right. So, Sridhar, do you want to start with the opening comment?
Sure. I think you spoke a lot. You already gave a lot of details. But I think we all know the kind of excitement that we have when it comes to generative AI, especially after the launch of many of these LLM-based platforms, whether it is ChatGPT, Bard, or any other solutions, right? It definitely poses a lot of opportunities. There is huge potential across various industry domains. Now, in my view, whether it's a hype, whether it is going to be a game changer, or it's going to impact organizations, I think it depends on how we as organizations quickly develop capabilities and take advantage, right, of the potential that generative AI has, and be the first mover, right? I think that's most important. And then, of course, there are so many possibilities that can open up. We start developing the fluency required to deal with the complexities as well as the potential that we can actually unearth from Gen AI in specific, right? I think there are 4 areas where we can immediately drive value for organizations. One is content generations, whether it is text, images, videos, music, and so on and so forth, impacting in a big way, right? Whether it is art, design, marketing, which cuts across various industries, customer service, and so on. I think there is a lot of potential. The next is software development. I think there is what we call engineering, whether it is to do with code generation or translation of code, automated testing, and so on, code documentation, for example. I think there is a lot of potential in terms of driving better developer productivity. Third, in my view, is about intelligence and insights, right? How can you provide more contextual intelligence? That doesn't mean that your existing dashboards, KPIs will die. It is about where do you bring Gen AI into this whole ecosystem, and because there are consumers who are very okay to sort of consume dashboards, KPIs, which is purpose built, but at the same time there are other users who would want to sort of get answers by various questions based on their current context. I think that's the contextual intelligence, recommendations, and in fact storytelling, right, with data. I think that those are huge potential. And the last one, in my view, of course, there are many others, but the immediate benefits can be realized with these. The last one is automation, process automation, right? It could be contact center automation, agent assistance, for example, existing conversational AI processes. How do you sort of bring Gen AI into it, and so on and so forth. So many use cases around that. So I think there is a lot of potential. It's about moving fast. I think that's where I would stop as an opening remark.
Thank you so much, Sridhar. And Chanda, many congratulations on the launch of your book, Embrace Digital to Drive Affordable Healthcare. So I'll start with that itself, right? So what are your views on applications of Gen AI on healthcare domain?
Oh, thank you, Muthu. I think it's been a good exercise for me and my co-author Avantika Sharma. She is the healthcare lead. So we kind of looked at, and I think it kind of applies across industry, right? When you see the whole phenomenon of how every industry, right, and every customers across these different segments are very focused around customer-centric behaviors, right? And healthcare is no different. So what we actually started seeing is, especially when you look at the payers and the providers side, the entire industry is kind of pivoting towards being more patient-centric, right? Which basically means, and there's been multiple of angles to it, right? There's one, how do you look at the whole data interoperability that's kicking in, right? The whole healthcare plan interoperability that's happening. There's a government mandate that's pushing in for pricing transparency, right? I think a lot of these are, I would say, forces that are basically pivoting the entire industry to kind of shift. And that's where, Avantika and I actually wrote about how do you look at, driving affordable care? Because today, it's really about, the dollar spent needs to give you higher order of values, right? So you don't want to spend more money on your insurances and policies. And the same thing happens on the provider side as well, right? So it's important for you to maximize the value that you can generate on, the investments that you're making, right? And hence, there is a very strong competition across the payer side as well as on the provider side to kind of engage with the patients more. So the book revolves around focusing on how do you use technology to basically drive affordable care. So one interesting aspect of that, of course, it talks about multiple areas, but a big part of the topic it does delve upon is on using some of these new tech and generative AI, like I think you said, Muthu, in your beginning commentary, is a big part of how it has fundamentally shifted, right? 6 months ago, people wouldn't even have understood what is an LLM, but today it's more or less mainstream, right? Like it's like in everybody's lingo, right? So the change has been, and even in the healthcare industry, it's no different. You start seeing, and this is across industries as well, right? But I think specifically since you talked about healthcare, I think we are seeing this on multiples of areas. I think Sridhar touched upon some of the industry agnostic areas like contact centers, right? You're talking about document aggregation. You talked about, applying data, AI-led BI, right? I think these are a bunch of these things that are pretty common across industries, but there are also other things like, think about a value-based care, right? Or think about prior authorization, think about claims processing. There are so many of these areas which are mainstream and core to, how the healthcare industry itself operates. And there is applicability of Gen AI in each of these areas, right? So that's where I would say, the industry is pivoting. And like I think you said, the Gen AI itself is no longer, something like a shiny object. It's more unreal. And embracing this is just going to pivot, each one of us in a very different trajectory in terms of the value realization that can happen. So I think that's my quick perspective on how I see this, Madhu.
Thank you so much, Chandar. So my next question is for you, Sridhar. We know there are multiple POCs that are happening across the industry. That also includes our internal Brilio scenario. But what do you think will be important from a scaling strategy perspective? Now, I'm looking at, also how different will it be from Gen AI scaling strategy versus a non-generative AI, a usual AI scaling strategy? How will it be different?
Yeah, I think it's true. We are all doing a lot of experimentation, POCs, and that's how it starts, right? Because you need to prove the value that some of these use cases that we've selected. What is the potential, and then start scaling, right? So absolutely, that's the way to start. But in terms of scaling, I think there are a few things that are very important in my view. One is, an underlying data platform which is robust, right? Having a comprehensive strategy in terms of, ensuring we have the high amount of, quality in terms of data, in terms of diversity of data that you have. Because when you are doing training of models, refining those, fine-tuning those models in a sandbox environment with limited data, and then the moment you get into a scaled environment, that it can surprise you. So you need to have the adequate representation of data and in terms of quality as well. I think that's very important first. Second is, generative AI is definitely going to have huge demands on computational resources, right? And the infrastructure. So you need to have a good strategy in terms of, first of all, being ready, right, with that infrastructure. And second, need to understand the cost of it, right? I think that's very important, because sometimes you try to scale and then the cost goes very high and it gets stopped. So I think an awareness of what it could cost is going to be very important. The second is, while whether it is a traditional AI models or generative AI, continuous research experimentation is very important. But I think it is even more important when it comes to generative AI, right? Because there is obviously, in terms of accuracy and the kind of outcomes that you want to achieve, it's very important to have that feedback loop from your various results and so on. I think that's very important. And in terms of democratization, right? It's not just one team doing it. Okay, there are multiple teams sort of doing POCs in a silo. So how do you learn from each other, right? So you have to be able to have a very platform-centric view, right, within an organization to democratize application of generative AI. So what I mean by platform-centric view is you have a foundational capability, right? And that lets all the users or all the, you could say, business owners sort of coming into that platform, looking at what others are doing, learn from each other. You can reuse some of those capabilities and so on and so forth. I think that lets you drive better adoption, learn from each other, and scale and the adoption becomes much more easier for the organization. Finally, it's about also a lot to do with ethical guidelines and frameworks. You talked about it, especially for regulated industries. It's extremely important. So the choice of what kind of models you want to use, how do you drive a better solution in terms of protecting your customers' data, privacy, and so on and so forth. I think it's very important. I think talent, of course, it is very important to have the right kind of talents. I think to summarize, whatever you do, right, it's very important to be clear about the value, right? You talked about it, value generation, and ensuring that you have a consistent feedback loop mechanism to drive a better adoption. I think the second part of the question for is there a difference between scaling strategy for a Gen AI based versus a traditional one? I think few differences. One is in terms of the need for significant amount of data when it comes to generative, because it requires that level of data to have the right kind of outputs. So it definitely varies. In a typical AI, traditional AI model, let's say if you want to do a text classification, it doesn't need so much of data, right? It can learn from a limited set of data. The second is in terms of computational cost, which I already talked about. It's obviously very high compared to the traditional models. And in terms of also I already touched upon the fact that customer feedback is much more important and impactful in a generative AI sort of a use case compared to the other ones. Of course, it's required irrespective of what you do, whether it is with traditional ML models or generative AI, but it is very much more important in my view in a Gen AI context.
Thank you so much, Sridhar, for a very comprehensive answer. So, Chandra, while it's exciting and it's an upcoming space, I also touched upon the nuances that LLMs have and how we need to be cautious about. So, what are your views on the risks, and how do you think we can mitigate them?
Oh, it's a great question, Muthu. I think see, one of the things that I'm seeing more and more, right? I think there is a push towards being more like embracing the hyperscaler models, right, that are naturally available, managed services, LLMs being available. I think we are seeing more of that. We are also seeing industry-specific large language models coming up with some of the hyperscalers, right? So we are seeing more of that. But there are also firms, right, which are not looking at these hyperscalers, right? They want to probably run more with open source versions that are out there, and they want to kind of continue to keep a tight control in terms of their obviously security of their data and their their IP, so on and so forth, right? So we're also seeing those type of things. But irrespective of all of these different models, right, I think what you would start to see is, and in fact, there are certain hyperscalers who also have variants of these LLMs, right? Like Google has something for end users, right? And they have the Vertex for enterprise users, so on and so forth. So we see different levels of classification, and obviously there is a lot of controls and a lot of mechanisms that is being put in. But I think some of the things that are fundamentally more that needs to be thought through, right? As somebody who's probably going to embrace this within their firms, I think would be primarily be around how we could probably infuse like a prompt injection, right? I think there is definitely a potential for us to manipulate, right, and potentially even deceive the model outputs that could come by, right? We could actually construct like truly good I would say the prompts, right, which could basically bypass their entire filter. So I think there is a need for us to look at building some of these context-aware filtering, right, and output encoding that probably can help us against these type of malicious prompts, input validations, a bunch of things that needs to kind of happen. I think the other area would be around potentially data leakages that could come in, right, because your models are learning from you, right? And in fact, I think when the ChatGPT came out, I saw a lot of people putting their like private things onto these public models, and that actually initiated a bunch of breaches that we're all well aware of. So it's important to, and obviously they came by from firms, right, saying, you can't put some of our internal IP, so on and so forth. I think there've been policies that have been put together, but I think a big part of this is also about the data leakage that could potentially happen, and this could basically be unintended, right? Where the model is learning from you, you're able to memorize a lot of these data, and that could potentially be a cause of data leakage, right? So which means our ability to kind of look at how we put this right secure infrastructures in place, right, I think is going to be important. So sandboxing would be critical. I think I'm also part of this large global community of CISOs and CTOs, right? So one of the things that we keep talking about is how do we probably run with managed services, or even with the open source version, but you still put a reverse proxy on those, just to ensure that there is there's no outbound of your private IPs and data as well, right? So I think there is a bunch of things that kind of comes in. And of course, I would also say, right, I think while I think generative AI is something that we are seeing coming important, what I would also say is not to rely too much on the generated content itself, right? I think it's based on the data that you're kind of putting together, kind of learning from you. So it's important for us to see the right purpose of looking at, is generative AI really something that's important for us in the context of the problem that we're trying to solve, or would a conventional ML models really work well for us, right? And not to look at generative AI. So I think looking at, I would essentially say like a three-step process, right? Where you're kind of looking at probably some kind of rule-based approach that could solve, let's say, some of the simple ones. And then you look at, conventional AI ML models, right? That could probably solve. And then the third level would be, looking at generative AI. So that I would say in summary, how we should embrace it. I think we shouldn't get into a form of factor saying, oh my God, everybody's doing generative AI, let's also go jump into generative AI. I think it has to be contextual and seeing what's really relevant, and then go make the call.
Hey, thanks, Chandar. I know we are running out of time, but one last follow-up question, Sridhar. You did talk about costs while you spoke about the scaling strategy. So do you want to touch upon what are the cost-specific strategies that we could follow?
Sure,
especially while looking at enterprise level scaling, right?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. We talked about data sets, high amount of data sets. Obviously, that's one of the reasons why it's expensive. There is Gen AI itself, right? In terms of computation needs, I think it's expensive as well. And the kind of talent that you need, right? These are some factors why the cost goes up. But however, that is not a limiting factor, right? It doesn't stop you from taking advantage of Gen AI, right, within our organizations. I think one of the things that I would probably say three things, right? One is in terms of taking a call whether you need LLMs to solve the problem. Do you need Gen AI to solve all your problems? No. So assessing why do you need to use an LLM to solve a problem versus traditional ML models, I think that's very, very important. Look at your functional need and does it address it? And the second one is, within looking at LLM versus traditional, the cost benefit analysis, right? Yes, you need an LLM model to a specific foundational model that you want to use. It could be multi-model, whatever it is, right? But then you do a cost benefit analysis and see in a scaled situation, does it really benefit you, right? So I think that's very important. Second is an upfront estimation of cost. I think from a planning perspective, budgeting, decision making is very important. Things like what's the right kind of LLM that I need to use? Do you want to go for an open source? Do you want to use OpenAI and so on and so forth? I think that's very important. Thirdly, I think we need to look at your own development and deployment processes, right? Building accelerators within the organizations so that people don't reinvent the wheel, they start leveraging it, make it better, evolve over a period of time. Second could be, what is the right approach to tackle a use case, for example, right? Where you need prompt engineering, better prompt engineering, for example, to solve a problem versus, taking a decision of fine-tuning models iteratively. It could cost you, right? So you need to balance the approach in terms of what kind of methodologies that you need to use to solve a specific use case. I think these three, I would say, in a very practical approach towards looking at cost, especially cost in a scaled situation.
Hey, thanks, Sridhar. There are a couple of questions that are coming in here. I think Srividya has asked, the LLM and Industry 4.0, how can we apply LLMs to industry automation? So I can take that question. I'm just, working with one of our manufacturing customers where we are looking at use cases from 4 different perspectives, right? One is the manufacturing itself. Within manufacturing, we are looking at product design and visualization, quality control with computer vision. When I'm talking about generative AI, we are looking at it from a multimodal perspective, right? So whatever use cases that I'm talking about could have, like, say, computer vision, image data that we are collecting in the factory. And it will also have a mix of the documentation that are available from our customers' factory as well. So quality control is one area where we are seeing a lot of success. And the other ones could be on the supply chain side of things, right? So, for example, demand forecasting, we all have been doing it in a very traditional way. Now, the demand forecasting itself, there are 2 ways in which we are applying generative AI. One is on the feature engineering aspect. There are a lot of information that are available in a very unstructured way, which we are currently not bringing in as features into our demand forecasting model. So this is one area where we are looking at how could we look at, like, say, a geopolitical scenario, data sets that are not available. For example, even if you look at, like, say, macroeconomic variables that are available, they don't have too much variability when we buy that data from a third-party source. So especially from a retail CPG perspective, we believe that, using generative AI for demand forecasting is giving us a very good lift. At least, in the MAPE, we are seeing at least 2 to 5% lift that we are observing when we use generative AI. The second aspect where we are using is there's a lot of information that is generally available within a factory, right? For example, say a thread manufacturing company factory might have thread manufacturing itself will be like a 45-day process. Then dyeing starts, then polishing happens, then the packaging happens. So there are multiple different parts of the manufacturing process, the manufacturing lead time that will get calculated. Now we could also get all this data connected to a chatbot to get insights, visibility on where the particular product itself is. Like if we go for something like a IoT sensor kind of solutions, we have seen in one of the use cases that we are working on, it's a very, very expensive solution, but getting all this data which is collected in different sources, if we are able to connect it and make sense, this is using generative AI is actually helping us. Then warehousing, inventory optimization, transportation, PLM, route optimization, then end-to-end order management. There are also a lot of document Q&A, production planning that we are using from an operations perspective. Workforce efficiency, optimization, right? Here again, there's a lot of unstructured data. So we are trying to use generative AI. When I say we are trying to use, what we are doing in the process right now is to put together the art of possible, and we are looking at what data is there, not there, and we are trying to come up with the ROI that we could map to the use cases so that we are able to prioritize what we could go into the MVP. There is another question from Nick. You reference potential business value of generative AI. How was this assessment conducted and which resources were leveraged? So the one that I was showing, like I mentioned, it's from McKinsey report, but we have also been, doing this for some of our customers where we are looking at the data that is available, the quality of information available. Now, when we automate it, how much of time, and cost we can reduce from a process perspective to be able to give that assessment, right? And the assessment can vary between 8 to 12 weeks. If all the data is available, we could also do this assessment in 4 weeks. Chandar, would you like to add?
No, I think you covered it, Muthu. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I see another question from Abhishek. Using ML models instead of LLM, does LLM increase the costs as compared to ML models? Yes, of course. Right now, the cost difference will have to be calculated. So me and my team, we are using something called a cost estimator that, the LLM cost estimator that we have built internally within Prilio. But what that cost estimator does is there are a lot of decision making we do into the LLM lifecycle itself. Right now, what is the data that I'm going to use for a particular POC or a use case? That itself will, decide on how much of, loading, fine tuning, all this cost is going to be. Then what kind of GPUs we are going to use? Of course, if the data is huge and if, the processing is going to be at a different level, then, we will have to use a better infrastructure, I would put it that way. And then comes, what is your choice of models? Are we going for open AI? Are we going for open source? Do we want to just stop with fine tuning, or do we want to just do prompt engineering? At every step in the life cycle, every small decisions that we are going to take will decide the entire cost. And that is where we see that, traditional ML model LLMs are a bit expensive, but how much of difference we will be able to tell based on all the different factors that will go into the decisioning process. Any other questions? All right. This was a fantastic experience hosting this episode. Like we mentioned, this is a series. And since this is the first episode, we have kept it very generic. But in the future sessions, we plan to look at very industry-specific applications, and we will go a little deeper into, some of the nuances of the technologies that are within generative AI. Until then, keep accelerating with generative AI. Thank you, everyone.